I'm Claire Whitman, 29 years old, and the night everything changed was supposed to be one of celebration. I'd driven back to Omaha for the grand opening of my parents' newest restaurant, the second location of Whitman's Steakhouse, and the place was packed with laughter camera flashes and the clink of champagne flutes. But just as I stepped away from the welcome table, I saw my father's face darken and his voice slice through the noise. "Get out, and don't come back." My mother didn't say a word, just lifted her wine glass with a smile that never reached her eyes. People froze mid-conversation, some turning away awkwardly, others staring straight at me. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just walked out into the cold Nebraska night and kept walking until the music faded behind me. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been pushed away by the people you thought would always stand behind you. I grew up just 10 minutes from that steakhouse in a 3-bedroom brick house where my parents built their reputation on hard work, crisp manners, and knowing everyone's name by heart. My dad ran the kitchen with precision, no shortcuts, no second chances, and my mom played the charming hostess in her pearl earrings and matching scarves. They believed in doing things the right way, or not at all, and raised us under that same roof of rules. Kindness mattered, but so did achievement. Being a Whitman meant you didn't complain, didn't quit, and didn't disappoint. My older sister Lena had always bristled against that. She started skipping dinner to write songs, dyeing her hair different colors, and chasing gigs in music bars 2 towns over. I stayed behind, did my homework at the counter after school, and memorized the dinner specials so I could help out when the waitstaff fell short. I wore clean dresses, showed up early, and made sure the salt shakers were full before the guests arrived. They didn't say it, but I knew I was the one they counted on. I brought home good grades, took on extra credit, and got my first job before I even had my license. Lena was the wild card, the wanderer. I was the steady one, the safe one, the daughter they trusted to uphold the Whitman name. By the time I graduated high school, I'd already learned that love in our house came wrapped in expectations. A good report card earned a polite nod from Dad, maybe a brief, "well done." A quiet dinner without complaint got you a rare smile from Mom. But it was never about how you felt. It was about how you looked, how you represented the family. The steakhouse wasn't just a business. It was an extension of who we were. Everything had to be polished, consistent, impressive. When I left for college in Lincoln, I carried all of that with me, the drive, the pressure, the need to prove something. I studied accounting because it made sense, built routines that worked, and eventually landed a full-time job in the city that let me stand on my own 2 feet. My world opened up slowly. I met Rachel during an internship, and she became the friend I didn't know I needed, sharp, funny, and fiercely protective. Tyler came along not long after a mechanical engineering major who saw straight through my polished smiles and wasn't afraid to challenge me gently when I deflected. I was starting to breathe. I was building something that was mine. But even from hours away, my parents' voices still reached me first through weekly check-ins, then through heavier asks, and then something more. Something that slowly pulled me back toward the very thing I thought I'd outgrown. I didn't know it yet, but that return to Omaha the night of the grand opening, the night I was told to leave for good, had been set in motion long before I walked through that door. When I left home, I thought the distance between Omaha and Lincoln would protect the life I'd begun to build. I kept my head down at work, buried myself in spreadsheets and tax filings, and came home to the small apartment I'd made my own secondhand furniture, soft lighting the quiet kind of peace I never knew growing up. Rachel and I met for coffee every Saturday morning, catching up over 2 sweet lattes and half-finished plans. Tyler and I would walk the trails outside the city after work, not always talking, just holding hands and letting the day settle behind us. It was steady, quiet, normal, and it felt like something I could finally keep. But then the calls started. At first it was just Dad, his voice low and clipped, asking how work was going and when I'd come home next. Then Mom would jump on the line, dropping small remarks about how busy things had been at the restaurant or how they were thinking about expanding the menu. They always ended the same way with a reminder. "You're still a Whitman," Dad would say. "Don't forget where you came from." I tried to shake it off, told myself they were just being parents, just trying to stay close. But the conversations grew longer, more pointed. Dad would mention slow weekends or delays in shipments, say things like, "We've been holding it all together, but it's not easy." Mom would talk about how much they'd given up over the years, how Lena had walked away, and how it was up to me now to keep the family name strong. I'd hang up and stare at my computer screen, the numbers swimming as a different kind of weight settled in my chest. Then one Thursday afternoon, my phone rang while I was in the middle of closing a quarterly report. I almost didn't answer. But when I saw it was Dad, I stepped into the hallway and picked up. He didn't waste time. "Claire," he said, "we're behind with the bank. $7,000. If we don't square it up, we could lose everything." I didn't speak right away, just leaned against the wall, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked him to repeat it. "7,000, he said again, quieter this time. "We're counting on you." That night, I sat at my dining table, the checkbook open next to my laptop. I stared at the figure in my savings account money I'd been tucking away for a down payment on a house. I thought about the porch I'd dreamed of, the little garden, the second bedroom I wanted to turn into a home office. And then I wired the full amount. No hesitation, no condition. Just a note that read, "For the restaurant. Hope this helps." I didn't tell Rachel. I didn't tell Tyler. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that it was family, and that they'd pay me back when they could. 3 weeks later, Dad called again. This time, he didn't sound embarrassed. "We need just a little more help," he said. $1,500 a month, just until we get back on track." I opened my budget and ran the numbers. That was nearly half my rent. I'd have to cut down on grocery delivery, cancel the gym, and put the house fund on hold. Still, I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "All right," I said. "I'll set it up." The payments started that month, and with them came the silences. I stopped going out as much, stopped buying new clothes. Even little things like coffee with Rachel or movie tickets with Tyler felt like indulgences I couldn't afford. But the next time I visited Omaha, the restaurant looked different, new somehow. The old tile floors had been replaced with dark wood planks. The chairs had been swapped out for cushioned booths with brass trim. There was a new bar near the entrance, polished oak, strung with pendant lights that shimmered like jewelry. I stood near the coat rack, taking it all in, unsure of whether to feel proud or confused. Mom walked past me in a tailored gray blazer, her gold bracelets catching the light. "Nice, isn't it?" she said, barely glancing my way. "We're updating the space, elevating the brand." I didn't know what to say. At dinner, I asked Dad if things were improving. He didn't answer directly, just said it was a tough market and they had to stay competitive. Mom chimed in, sipping from her wine glass. "You've done so well for yourself, Claire. We're so proud. It means a lot to have your support." I nodded. But something about the way she said it, like I was a donor instead of a daughter, stuck with me. Rachel noticed first. We were at lunch one afternoon, and I was picking at my salad while she updated me on a project at work. Then she stopped mid-sentence and said, "Claire, are you still sending money home?" I didn't answer, and she raised her eyebrow. "Because I saw your mom at the mall last week. She was wearing a Burberry coat and holding a Louis Vuitton bag." I shrugged, said maybe it was a gift. Rachel just shook her head. "They're using you," she said, "and they're not even hiding it." Tyler brought it up that weekend. We were sitting on the couch, a movie playing low in the background. "Claire," he said gently, "you're killing yourself for them, and they don't even say thank you." I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. I wanted to defend them, but nothing came out. Every month I sent $1,500, and every time I saw my mother, she had something new, a bracelet, a scarf, a purse. They talked about expansion, about remodeling, about elevating the brand, and I kept going to work, kept packing my lunch and cutting corners and watching my savings shrink. I told myself it was my duty. I told myself it was temporary. But deep down, something had started to crack. The pressure was building, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep holding it all together. I kept sending the payments month after month, even when it meant giving up little things. Brunch with friends, a new coat the weekend getaway Tyler and I had planned since spring. I watched my savings dip lower each time the calendar hit the 15th. There were no thank yous, no updates, just the occasional call from Dad when another upgrade needed covering, or from Mom when a shipment ran late and they had to smooth things over with the customers. At home, I stayed quiet about it. Tyler would glance at my bank statements when I left them open on the counter, but he didn't say much, just tightened his jaw and kept unloading the dishwasher. I knew what he was thinking, and part of me was grateful he didn't push harder. One Sunday afternoon, I drove to Omaha for dinner. Mom had asked me to come, said she missed me. The table was set like always, cloth napkins, white candles, the good china with gold trim. We ate steak, of course, Dad talking mostly about staffing issues and menu changes. I tried to listen, tried to feel part of it, but my stomach stayed tight the whole time. Near the end of the meal, Mom looked up from her glass and tilted her head toward me. "Your job still involves spreadsheets all day," she asked, a polite smile tugging at her lips. "I just think you could aim a little higher." I nodded slowly, unsure how to answer. Then she turned to Tyler, who'd come with me that day. "And what is it you do again, dear?" "Something with machines." He cleared his throat. "Mechanical engineering," he said. "I work in product testing." Mom swirled her wine. "That's sweet," she said. "You seem steady. Claire could use someone steady." The room went quiet after that. Tyler didn't respond. Dad cut into his steak like nothing had happened. I focused on folding my napkin, trying not to let the heat in my chest show on my face. Back in Lincoln, Rachel called me one evening. She'd been digging through some documents for a consulting project and paused mid-sentence. "Claire," she said, her voice different. I found something weird. She pulled up a line of records on her laptop and told me my parents had taken out another credit line against the restaurant, this one for $20,000. "They didn't mention anything to you?" she asked. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "They're still asking for money," I said. Rachel exhaled. "They're borrowing behind your back, Claire. That's not just pressure. That's lying." I stared at the numbers on the screen, not wanting to believe them. That night I called Dad. I didn't yell. I just asked, "Did you take out another loan?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "It's business," he said. "You wouldn't understand." Mom's voice joined in on speaker. "You're overreacting. We're doing this for the family." I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. A few days later, Tyler and I took a walk along the river. The leaves had started turning the path scattered with gold and rust. He stopped near the edge, looked out at the water, then back at me. "You're not yourself," he said. "You're always tired, always worried." I didn't answer. "You keep trying to save them, Claire." "But what are you losing in the process?" I swallowed, but the words stayed lodged in my throat. "It's killing us," he said quietly. We stood there for a long time, the wind moving across the water. I couldn't promise him anything, not yet, but I knew something had shifted. Back at my apartment, I started making small changes. I stopped taking their calls at night. I left texts unread until morning. I still sent the money, but I didn't ask how it was used. I didn't want to know. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could keep doing this. My life felt like it was on pause, like everything I worked for was being siphoned away, one quiet withdrawal at a time. And even as the tension wore me down, I told myself it would get better, that they'd get back on their feet, that I just had to hold out a little longer. But somewhere deep down, I was starting to see the truth. The opening of the second Whitman Steakhouse was meant to be a family milestone. I drove in from Lincoln that afternoon, pulled into the packed parking lot, and sat for a moment behind the wheel before walking in. The restaurant looked polished, gold-trimmed menus, floral centerpieces, and the glow of new chandeliers flickering off the glassware. Servers in matching uniforms moved between tables with trays of hors d'oeuvres. I wore a plain black dress and kept my hair pulled back, hoping to blend into the crowd. I walked the perimeter once, nodding at a few familiar faces, former teachers, neighbors, a couple of city council folks who used to eat at the original location on Friday nights. Everyone smiled like they'd been coached. The speeches hadn't started yet, and the bar was loud with handshakes and catch-up chatter. I stayed near the back, close to the coat room, waiting for a chance to say hello, without being pulled into a circle I didn't want to be part of. Melissa found me first. She leaned in for a hug, still holding her clutch under one arm, and whispered, "I heard what you did. Paying off that loan? That's incredible." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was enough. Heads turned, conversations quieted. I felt it before I saw him. My father's steps were quick, his shoes sharp against the hardwood. When he stopped in front of me, his eyes were locked on Melissa. "What did you say?" he asked, voice low but tight. Melissa blinked. "Just that. Claire." "Enough," he snapped. "That's not your place." Then he looked at me. His jaw was set, lips pressed tight. "Get out, Claire. Get out and don't come back." The silence spread from table to table. Even the bartender froze mid-pour. I didn't speak. Mom stepped forward, next glass in hand, her smile too perfect, too fixed. "You heard him," she said softly. "You've done enough." Melissa reached for my arm, but I pulled back. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room on me. I wanted to say something, to call out the loans, the lies, the years of draining my savings while they repaved patios and swapped table linens. But nothing came. I walked out slowly, the sound of my heels dull on the polished floor. Outside, the wind had picked up, slicing through my dress as I stepped off the curb. I didn't stop walking until I reached my car. The door slammed behind me with a final thud. On the drive back to Lincoln, my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to. The sun was setting behind the highway signs, casting everything in gold and red. At a gas station on the edge of town, I pulled over and opened the banking app on my phone. I found the recurring transfer to my parents' account. $1,500 scheduled for the next morning. I stared at it for a few seconds, then tapped cancel. It asked me to confirm. I did. I put the phone down and sat there a while, the engine-off windows beginning to fog from the inside. No calls came that night. No apology. No explanation. The silence said everything. The morning after the grand opening, I woke to a quiet apartment. My phone was still on the nightstand screen, dark. No texts. No missed calls. I sat up slowly, not sure what I expected to feel, regret maybe, or that old instinct to fix what had broken. But all I felt was stillness. I made coffee, opened the blinds, and started my workday like it was any other Monday. A week passed, then another. The silence held. The Whitmans didn't reach out. There were no explanations, no apologies, no second thoughts. Rachel checked in a few times, careful with her words. Tyler stayed close, never pressing. When I told him I'd canceled the transfers, he just nodded and said, "Good." Then, one afternoon, a text from a colleague in Omaha lit up my screen. It was a news article. Whitman Steakhouse closes after foreclosure proceedings. The second location had been shuttered. The original, too. The bank had moved fast. The headline was followed by a single photo, one I knew well. The neon sign above the door had gone dark. The parking lot was empty. I stared at it for a long time. The next day, I drove past the building on my way to visit Rachel. The chairs were still stacked inside, the patio furniture gone. A printed notice taped to the glass read, "Closed until further notice." But everyone knew what that meant. Later that week, it rained hard. Around 7 that evening, someone knocked at my apartment door. I opened it to find my father standing there, soaked through his coat. He looked smaller somehow, eyes hollow, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of something that wasn't weather. "Claire," he said, "we lost the business." I didn't speak. "We need help starting over," he went on. "We don't have much left. But you've always been steady. You've always known how to manage things." He stepped forward slightly, clasping his hands. "Please." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just stood there and said, "You had your chance. You chose not to tell me the truth. I'm done." His face shifted something between surprise and defeat. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, but nothing came. I closed the door gently and leaned against it as the sound of his footsteps faded into the rain. The next day, Melissa called. "Claire," she said, "you're not going to believe this." She'd heard from a friend working at the unemployment office. My mother had filed a claim listing herself as laid off from the restaurant 2 weeks after the business had legally closed. I called a contact in state administration and asked if that was even possible. It wasn't, at least not legally, but the claim was filed, active, benefits already dispersed. I sat with the phone in my lap, unsure what to do. Eventually, I called her. "Is it true?" I asked. "You're collecting unemployment?" "After everything." She didn't hesitate. "It's just temporary. You don't understand how hard things have been." She laughed softly like it was all a misunderstanding. I hung up. There was no space left for confusion. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, lights dimmed, and thought about the life I'd built in Lincoln. My job, the small routines, the coffee dates with Rachel, Tyler's quiet support, the dream of a house that had once felt so far away. I pulled up my phone, went to the contacts list, and blocked both numbers. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just sat there, finally still. The days after I blocked my parents' numbers passed quietly. No more late-night calls, no voicemails with veiled guilt. The silence that had once unsettled me now felt like a kind of peace. I poured my energy into work, took long walks after dinner, and finally made space to think about what I wanted next. A few weeks later, Rachel and I met at a small diner near campus. We sat by the window with coffee and pie, the kind of catch-up that had once felt like a luxury. I told her about the foreclosure, the visit from my father, and the unemployment claim. She listened without interrupting, just nodded slowly and said, "You did what you had to do." Back at my apartment, I opened the spreadsheet where I tracked my finances. For the first time in years, there was no outgoing transfer to Omaha. My savings balance had started creeping upward again. I began running the numbers for a down payment revisiting listings I'd bookmarked months ago. It felt tentative at first, but then something shifted. I reached out to a realtor. 2 months later, I closed on a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of Lincoln. White siding, a modest front porch, and a backyard with room for a garden. On closing day, Tyler met me at the office. He held out the keys with a quiet grin and said, "You earned this." We moved in slowly, painted the walls ourselves, picked out furniture one piece at a time. On weekends, we sat on lawn chairs out back, watching the sky turn pink. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. I never heard much about what happened to my parents after that. A mutual friend mentioned my dad had taken a job stocking shelves at a local grocery store in Omaha. Someone else said my mom was working part-time answering phones at a call center. They'd moved into a small apartment across town, far from the house we grew up in. Every now and then I'd wonder if they were okay, if they ever talked about what happened. But I didn't reach out. I didn't ask. I had no interest in picking up pieces that weren't mine to carry anymore. The more distance I put between us, the clearer things became. I spent years trying to measure up to be the dependable one, the daughter who held everything together. I thought if I just worked hard enough, gave enough, I'd finally be seen for who I was. But what I built in Lincoln, this home, this quiet, steady life, wasn't given to me. It was the result of every moment I chose to step away, every time I said no. It happened gradually. My old life faded into the background, not with one clean break, but in quiet pieces that no longer demanded to be picked up. I didn't look for updates on my parents, didn't ask around, didn't scroll their names online. But stories had a way of finding me. One day after work, I ran into Mr. Connors, the former butcher who used to supply both restaurant locations. We bumped into each other at the hardware store, both standing in front of a row of paint swatches. He asked how I was doing, then hesitated. "I saw your dad last week," he said. "He's at the Safeway now, stocking shelves in the back." I nodded. I didn't ask anything else. A month or so later, Rachel mentioned Evelyn during a coffee run. "Call center work," she said, tucking her receipt into her coat pocket. "Inbound customer support, part-time. It's different, I guess." They'd moved into a one-bedroom apartment not far from the bus line. The big house with the patio and imported countertops was long gone. There was no announcement, no formal collapse. But in every story passed along, I saw it play out the slow undoing of everything they built. Meanwhile, my life was unfolding in full color. Tyler and I hosted a small housewarming in late spring. Just a few friends folding chairs in the backyard, paper plates, and a Bluetooth speaker playing easy music. Rachel brought a bottle of wine. Melissa came 2 arms full of flowers and a dish she made from a recipe my grandmother used to keep taped to the fridge. We grilled burgers, made s'mores over a tiny fire pit, and laughed at how uneven the deck still was. Someone knocked over a planter, and no one cared. It was simple, it was warm, and for the first time in years, I wasn't watching the clock or checking my phone for calls from Omaha. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes while Tyler dried. He bumped his shoulder into mine and said, "It's good here, isn't it?" I looked out the window over the sink. The porch light cast a soft glow across the yard. A breeze moved through the trees. "It really is," I said. There were moments when the past still tugged at me, memories of the restaurant's back kitchen, the smell of garlic butter and grilled onions, the sound of my father's voice calling out table numbers. But those memories no longer felt like obligations. They were just echoes. I'd thought justice would look like repayment, an apology, something formal, but it turned out to be something quieter. I had no desire to watch them fail, but I also didn't feel responsible for lifting them up anymore. They'd built their lives on conditions: be useful, be perfect, don't disappoint. I had spent years chasing their version of loyalty, and now without any fanfare that chase had ended. The life I had now, the home, the peace, the space to breathe, it hadn't come from their approval. It had come from walking away. One afternoon in late summer, I stood barefoot on the back porch, a glass of iced tea in my hand, and watched the sunlight move across the lawn. Tyler was inside humming while he patched up a squeaky cabinet door. A few friends were coming by later. Nothing big, just grilled corn, folding chairs, and good conversation. The kind of evening that didn't require anything to be proved. I thought about how far I'd come from the girl who used to scrub counters in heels after a school debate, hoping to earn a nod from her father or a word of approval from her mother. I used to believe love meant performance, that if I worked hard enough, gave enough, they'd eventually see me. But walking away had taught me something I never could have learned by staying. That peace isn't given by others. It's chosen. It's built. It's protected. My parents never apologized, not for the loans or the pressure, or for turning me into a quiet source of rescue when they needed money more than they needed a daughter. But I don't carry that hurt the same way anymore. I still think of them sometimes, especially when I pass old diners that smell like wood smoke and garlic, or when someone at a gathering says the word legacy. But the home I have now isn't built on their terms. It's mine, every corner of it. The chipped mug I keep by the sink, the worn books stacked on the living room shelf, the quiet mornings with coffee and no expectations. Rachel visits most weekends, still teasing Tyler about his measuring skills, still bringing her wild ideas and spreadsheets filled with dreams. Melissa sends postcards when she travels for work, bright little reminders that family doesn't have to mean pain. And Tyler, he's never once asked me to be anything but myself. We talk about the future sometimes. A bigger garden, maybe a dog, maybe more. I'm not sure I'll ever fully forget the girl I was back then, the one who bent until she nearly disappeared. But I'm not her anymore, and I don't need to be. Justice didn't come with fanfare, it came with boundaries. With quiet decisions. With the understanding that loving someone doesn't mean letting them use you. Sometimes walking away is the only way to come home to yourself. Thanks for listening to my story. If any part of it spoke to something in you, feel free to share where you're listening from or what you're walking away from in the comments. And if you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe. There are more stories coming, and I'd be glad to have you here.